All right, guys. It's getting to the politics season, so I got to do more politic. No, but for real, it makes I kind of enjoy politics more. I guess during this, it's a seasonal thing. It's like when we go crabbing. It's crabbing season, you know. But this is a David Pakman talked to Dennis Prager. Dennis Prager is like the founder or whatever of PragerU, which is basically a right-wing misinformation machine. But hey, it gives us plenty of content to talk about. So let's see what this little conversation piece is about.
For the first time, maybe not the last. Today we're going to be speaking for the first time, maybe not the last time. We'll see how it goes with Denis Prager. Many of you may know him from PragerU, from his radio program. He had a conversation not too long ago with our friend Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks. Denis, welcome. It's great to speak to you today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Just to start, and this can be so quick and then we move on, just as a sort of sanity check, I've started to ask guests in this year, last year, the following question. Is there any way to accurately say that Donald Trump won the 2020 election? Just a simple...
Listen, Donald Trump took the L. Even my conservative family are like, yeah, he took the L. He shouldn't have been a baby about it. You know? So
answer if there is one, and if not, it's fine for you to explain further.
So I have a relatively simple answer.
This is a really good like litmus test to see how see how stupid you are. To see how easy you are drawn to conspiracy theories. Because even like Mike Pence was like, bro, everything was done correctly. You know what I mean? So
from the election day to this day.
Yes, sir.
I am agnostic, which has satisfied neither the left nor the right.
Okay.
My colleagues on the right want me to say it was stolen, and people on the left want me to say we are certain it wasn't stolen.
Well, and half of the right also wants you to say that, right?
Half of the right wants me to. Oh, I wouldn't say half. I would say most people on the right believe it was stolen, or that there was a.
That's sad. That's sad. I don't even want to believe that. I don't even think that that's true. Is that true? Most of them think it was stolen. Like in general, election tampering happens like every year. It's usually individuals that like do the bad thing, but it's nowhere near enough to have an actual impact on anything. But if we're saying like that it was definitively stolen, dude, or if there's that many people saying, oh, that's sad. Like that's fucking crazy. That's just fucking insane to me.
Good chance it was.
Where's the innkeeper? Am I dumb?
I don't know what that gains us, but it's fair that you ask. See, it's funny. You regard that as a sanity check.
I do.
Yes.
Okay, so let me offer my sanity check.
Please.
Do you believe that men who say they're women can compete with women in women's sports?
I don't think that trans women should compete in women's sports now. Because I think that we understand that there is an objective biological advantage of going through male puberty. If they didn't go through male puberty, then maybe that's a new conversation. But all the information we have tells us that like a person who goes through a male puberty is going to have a biological advantage, right? And so like and by the way, I don't say that for fun. I wish trans people could compete in sports with cis people, like trans women specifically, because none of them are transitioning to win. That's just stupid. Just because you watched the movie Joanna Man on Comedy Central 20 years ago doesn't mean that it's true. And so I'm sympathetic to that, but the reality is like based on the information we have, we know it's like a pretty significant unfair advantage.
I think in a lot of sports that does not make sense.
Yeah, fair.
So
I think that there's some endurance sports maybe that women are better at or something. Somebody told me that. I think they're talking about like maybe curling and ironing.
Was that the answer you expected? Because you did a little bit of a look to the side there. But did you think I was going to...
I didn't look to the side because I took off my earphones.
Understood, sir.
Oh, okay.
I realized that I don't need them.
Okay. But this is a different topic, Denis.
I'm sorry?
It's a different...
Well, yeah, but he's doing his litmus test for you. And so, like, right now, we're kind of just going back and forth and just taking shots at people's credibility as per each audience, right? Because the conservative audience is going to like Denis if he says that the election was stolen. And a progressive audience may like David, less, depending on the audience, if he thinks that trans women should compete in sport, or that would be fair.
Different topic. Do we want to close on the election first?
Oh, well, you said you just wanted to ask that question for a sanity check.
Okay, and you're agnostic is the answer.
Yeah. So I am agnostic because so many things happened that were odd or unique. Like it was the first time that an incumbent president had ever gotten more votes than he did in his first election and lost.
Yeah, that's not really bizarre, though, right? We know that's not bizarre. And the reason we know it's not bizarre is because more people voted. You had a week to vote. Normally, you get one Tuesday to vote. This time, you had an entire week to vote. And so you're obviously going to see more turnout when you give people the opportunity to be able to vote conveniently, instead of having to take off on a Tuesday, which is a random day. On top of that, there was a lot of mail-in ballots because of COVID. It's not really weird at all. And anybody who is, and I don't think Dennis thinks that it's that weird. I think that this is just kind of like a desperate cling argument. But it's not weird in the slightest, if we're being absolutely honest here. So
that all the swing states went in his favor. That 17 of the 18 counties that are considered bellwether counties went in.
Well, of course, there's going to be different voting demographics because more people can vote, and a lot of times, like, people won't vote. It's like, yeah, sure.
His favor. Those who think something bad happened are not out of their minds.
Okay, I mean, we don't have to make this the subject of the conversation, but
I think that if you're somebody that's questioning and you're like, it's suspicious, that's fine. Like, I think a reasonable amount of suspicion is fine. But there's a difference between that versus people who like actually they believe in the who believe that there was like massive tampering to the point where it was appropriate to do a January 6th.
Things sometimes happen for the first time. I guess the question I would ask as a follow-up would be, did you see compelling evidence from any one state that suggests that Joe Biden lost it even though he was given the win? Is there a single state where you feel confident it was stolen?
Georgia might be one of them. Pennsylvania might be one.
I'm pretty sure they did like really in-depth investigations, the states themselves, like the Republican parties in those states. I'm pretty sure. Could be wrong. And they came to the conclusion that that is inaccurate. So, terrible stuff.
And of course, people say, because I love to have people I differ with on my show, and so I read the left. I only wish the left read the right as much as I read the left.
Well, I try to, but what evidence was there in Georgia?
You probably do. I think if you do, you're atypical. But in any event,
yeah. What's the Georgia evidence?
All the time that courts dismissed all these cases. That's true, but that's the tragedy. See, if I were an America-loving Democrat,
they dismissed the cases because there was no substantial evidence.
And there are 11 America-loving Democrats, and there are America-hating Democrats. There are both, but there are America.
Yeah, same thing with Republicans. I just want to be very clear. I mean, when you're cheering on Russia over America, you're an America-hating Republican. Just to be good.
Democrats. If I were one, I would say, please let us air all of these complaints.
Yep.
Let us have some type, as close as we can, to some neutral authority. Not rule on it. Just allow.
I could have swore that the people that looked into it were the literal Republican Party in those states were the ones that looked into the voter fraud.
Allow the American public to hear what evidence there might be. And I'll add another thing. Okay. If one believes, and I'd love you to respond to this.
Yeah.
If one believes that Donald Trump is a neo-Nazi fascist.
Something I've never said, but we could maybe find someone who believes that. Yeah.
Well, okay. I believe you haven't said it, but it's not germane to my argument. Whether you said it or not, it's said often that he is a fascist.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Well, when he's questioning censoring the media that says that disagreeable things to him, and refuses to take the L on the election and incites a riot and things like that. Like, yeah, there's an argument to be made that he's kind of a fascist.
Fascist is constantly said on the left, and so if you believe that, aren't you morally bound to cheat on his behalf? For example, if I were in Germany in 1932 during the elections that brought Hitler to power, I tell you, I would have cheated on behalf.
I mean, I will say it's an impressive argument. I'm not even gonna lie. It's actually an impressive argument. Like, this guy isn't stupid. He's making a logical argument. If you think he's a fascist, wouldn't that mean that you personally feel that you have a moral obligation to actually steal the election from somebody you believe is Hitler-esque? Yeah, I guess the answer would be yes. Do I think that there was still fraud? No, I think that our system is good enough to not allow wide-scale voter fraud, of course. But it's still was interesting.
Of any other party than Hitler's party.
Yeah.
Aren't you morally bound to cheat if you believe the man is a fascist?
You'd have to ask someone who believes that. I don't know. I mean, listen, we only have a half hour and we're 5 minutes in.
Look, let's talk about
I think what I would say is the audience can judge Is there evidence out of Georgia that's convincing to them? Is your answer to did Trump win logical into them in any way? Let's let the audience decide on this section of the conversation. Fair. I'm really interested in talking to you about woke, anti-woke, cultural issues, etc. Now, you and I could pick one thing like cat litter boxes in bathrooms or, quote, men and women's sports or drag shows or whatever. And we could just talk about that for 25 minutes. But I want to zoom out a little bit because you've been in this for a while and I've been following many of the things you've said about these issues. Here's my curiosity. If you look at polling, if you're going to just reject polling, then we'll talk about that. But let's assume that we have some polling that tells us something that is relatively close to what the country believes. Record support for same-sex marriage today. Record number of people saying, I'm moving away from religion. Highest in the Roe v. Wade era of the country says abortion should be legal in most cases.
Okay.
60% says we haven't gone far enough on making trans people feel welcome. Okay, I could go on, but you get the gist of what I'm saying.
Okay.
Do you feel as though this is a lost cause and the country has clearly gone in a different direction from where you would like to see it? Or what do you think might happen that would turn around this 30, 40-year trend of moving to the left culturally that I believe we are seeing in the polls?
I mean, it's an interesting question. Obviously, he's not going to think it's a lost cause because he's very religious and he's pumping out like literal propaganda for like children on his website. But yeah, I mean, I think that's why the Republican Party has turned to really just shitty tactics of misinformation and non-science tactics. Like I always say, this isn't a hot take, but there's no meaningful anything coming from Republicans. There's a person that keeps commenting on all my videos, which is funny. Their name is like the Dark Master or something. And they constantly, every time I say that there's no meaningful anything, like no meaningful reform or policy coming from Republicans, they say, yes, there are. You just don't listen. And they said that 3 or 4 times now. And what's interesting is they've never told me what the meaningful reform is. They just said that they exist. It doesn't. There's no policy for healthcare. There's no policy for gun control. There's no policy for adoption. There's no policy for anything. For global warming, there's no policy for anything. Everything is cut taxes, but that's dumb, right? And I'm going to be very clear. Cutting taxes is silly. Obviously, I believe that our government isn't exactly using our taxes to perfection. Of course, when you can't even get a reasonable audit on the military, which is like our biggest, is a huge expenditure, you know that something a little fishy is going on. You know, it smells like when my wife turns the seat warmer on in the car. I'm just kidding. That's not true. My wife she smells beautifully. And so it's still either way, it's unfeasible to cut taxes. We exist in a technology generation. Technology is displacing jobs and driving down wages. We're going to continue to see an overall less and less available jobs, especially in the lower skilled labor brackets. You go to any supermarket, you're seeing automated like self-checkout, fast food, supermarkets, even convenience stores are starting to implement this. At my 7-Eleven, I could scan everything on my phone. I could just walk up to a thing at the end of it, the exit, and scan my phone over a box, and it'll let me take it out. So we need to figure out a way to get, I think, money into people's hands, but cutting taxes is not going to cut it because that mostly just helps people at the top, and that's not exactly the best to help people at the bottom. Trickle-down to economics doesn't work effectively. And so to me, again, universal basic income, I think it is literally a conservative solution to this problem. And that is the solution. And this is like an idea that like Milton Friedman had come up with this. You know, he's been dead for a while, so it's obviously not a current Republican Party platform. But that would be it. I mean, it gives people money. It gives people agency over that money. Yes, so they'll make bad choices sometimes, but that's okay. And that would have a positive impact. It would be a great way to get rid of like a lot of bureaucracy where it comes to the money. And that would solve a lot of the problems that we're having. There's no policy replacement because they believe is that the government should not have involvement in those specific issues. No, that's not a reasonable policy. That's silly. That's not a meaningful policy. That means nothing at all. Our problems come from, in a lot of instances, not enough government intervention. Like for instance, like the Great Recession of 2007 or 8, whatever. That was because banks were able to basically gamble with their worth up to 30 times even the amount their actual worth on really risky investments, and then when they failed, they get government bailouts. And if we don't bail them out, then the banks collapse and our country collapses. And so, the Obama administration implemented a safeguard, and then Trump removed it. The regulation isn't a bad thing. There's no meaningful, intelligent policy reform coming from Republicans. It's just that's the problem. But like I said, UBI is the conservative solution to the problem. And it's something that a conservative used to plug back in the day. And now, like, the Republican Party is quite literally, they say anti-socialism when they're okay with corporate socialism. And they live in states that benefit heavily from blue states, because donor states are like all the top 10 are blue states. A donor state is where, you pay more to the federal government than you get back in federal grants. And these red states are the ones that are benefiting the most from wealth redistribution. So,
there's no question we're moving to the left culturally. The first thing people have to do is recognize reality. You may or may not be happy with it. Just parenthetically, I just did an hour of radio because I do a lot of hours that are not politics, and
sure.
And it was about a subject because I'm writing a commentary on the Bible, and I'm finishing volume 4, in which I discuss. On one verse, is there luck in life, or is everything God's will? I'm a deep believer in God. And of course, I believe there's bad luck, because that's reality. If you get a kidney stone, and I use that example, I don't believe God placed the kidney stone in your kidney. I believe that it was your crappy luck that you got a kidney stone.
But let me just dig, not to interrupt, but I want to make sure we know what you mean by luck. Do you mean by, let's imagine the prevalence of kidney stones is 2%, just for hypothetical for our conversation. God created a world in which there's a 2% prevalence of kidney stones. You had the bad luck to be in the 2%. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. That's
okay. Now, why did God create the kidney stones to begin with?
Because God did not create a perfect nature.
What are we talking about?
For our conversation. But let me just dig it.
Kidney. I get a kidney stone, and of course I believe there's bad luck, because that's reality. If you get a kidney stone, and I use that example.
Did I miss a context here?
I don't believe God placed the kidney stone in your kidney. I believe that it was your crappy luck that you got a kidney stone. But
I thought God was prevalent in like all things. Doesn't God have dictate everything?
Just dig it, not to interrupt, but I want to make sure we know what you mean by luck. Do you mean by, let's imagine the prevalence of kidney stones is 2%, just for hypothetical for our conversation. God created a world in which there's a 2% prevalence of kidney stones. You had the bad luck to be in the 2%. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. That's
okay. Now, why did God create the kidney stones to begin with?
Because God did not create a perfect nature. I mean, trees can fall, avalanches can happen.
Okay.
It is our task to fight cancer and to be able to live with avalanches.
Got
it. The human being wanted to leave the Garden of Eden. That's my take on the story. We rather live in a free universe than in a perfect universe.
Okay.
Okay.
So Eve actually is pretty based for eating that apple. Oh.
But I'm glad you went through theology with me. Anyway, the only reason I raised this is I am not happy to acknowledge the power of bad luck or good luck, but it is the reality. I am not happy that 45% of young Americans say, according to Pew, that they believe in free speech, but not for hate speech. It shows you how.
Well, I don't think that there's anything wrong with being with free speech and not hate speech. The problem is like, what do you define hate speech as? Like, if you just hate the speech, that's obviously smelly poop. That's nothing. But if your definition of like hate speech is like when that speech has is harmful in like a physically harmful, it calls to like death or something or attack. I agree with that, that's what free speech is. So I would have to know how they're defining free speech. I feel like it's one of those things where, we can all hear any level of words and we instantly assign values to those words based on our life experience. And so to me, when I hear hate speech, for me, a hate speech is like, I want to kill this group, which I obviously don't. That's hate speech, and that shouldn't be allowed. You should get arrested for that. Hate speech to somebody else might be, they misgendered me. And while I think misgendering is shitty and disrespectful, it's not hate speech, right? And so I don't know what the parameters of a hate speech are.
Incoherent young people's thinking is that they don't understand that the whole point of free speech is to allow speech that you can't stand. Okay, I'm a Jew. If you don't think the Holocaust happened, you're a liar, you are sick, you are perverted, but you are allowed to say it. By the way, you're not allowed in most European countries. You can be imprisoned for denying the Holocaust.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm a Jew as well, and I believe exactly what you just said.
I believe you.
Okay.
I had a feeling you would, but just know your side is as opposed to free speech, as more opposed than ever any segment of Americans has ever been. We are living through the greatest crisis of free speech in American history. That poll is an example. Here's another one.
Okay.
25% of Americans aged 40 and over have never been married, as opposed to 8% in 1980. We went from 8 to 25% in 40 years.
Can we talk about that one a little more? That one I find interesting. I'm not 40, but I'm in a long-term relationship.
What the fuck did I just do?
I have a baby. I'm not married. It's a conscious decision I've made, evaluating what is marriage in 2023. Is that the sort?
Yeah, I mean, that is, I don't think that it is necessarily an indicator of the downfall of society. I'm not saying that Dennis Prager does think that, but I've seen a lot of conservatives make it seem like that. It usually goes along with like the lowered birth rates as well, you know. And the reason, there's multiple reasons. One, we have access to a lot of fun stuff, and a lot of times we'd rather spend resources doing that, of course. So that's a selfish argument, but I think that humans can be very selfish, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think part of it's an incredible expense to have a baby, and in a very in a healthcare system that can be very cumbersome, that can get frustrating. Part of it is because women are trying to work and develop their own their own jobs and their own careers, and that, you have to put a baby to the wayside for that for a while. I think that there's a lot of things. I think there's economic stressors in our country. I think that people who are more educated tend to care more about economic stressors rather than like where there's people who are uneducated don't actually have don't make money conscious decisions, and they end up having more kids. And so you have a lot of different things. And what happens is, in general, you're never going to solve every problem, right? Every time you solve one problem, another one's going to come up. It's about what is how bad is the new problem, and is it worth it? And that's obviously women's freedom. It's worth having an issue with lowered birth rates, especially since we could displace that with immigration. But then you go, okay, well, we want to increase the native birth rate. How do we do that? Okay, well, why don't we try to figure out a way to allow better access to childcare? Why don't we try to make it cheaper to birth a baby? Why don't we try to make it so that there's better protections for women or people now who are pregnant, so that they can maintain their jobs and maybe be able to stay home for a few months with their kid while also getting paid? That's how you would incentivize that again.
Sort of contract I'm interested in. Do I need that to mediate my relationship with my girlfriend? Are there protections that I find necessary? I don't know that for me, and for so many other people I know that are probably in the group you're sort of describing here, I don't know that it's any kind of moral commentary or a commentary on the nature of relationships, but more about, for most of human history, this sort of contract didn't exist. There was a period where it peaked. I think it was the 50s or 60s or 70s. It seems to be in decline. It's sort of a blip. I don't know that it's that indicative of the broader point you're trying to make, Dennis.
It's funny you should say this. I went to a wedding last Sunday night, and my wife just spoke to the woman who got married.
Yeah.
And they had lived together for about 4 years.
Okay.
And she said, everything feels different. And I always explain to people, you use the word girlfriend. So you'll just have to take my word for it.
Please.
That you would be conveying a very different image of yourself and your relationship if you said my wife.
I agree.
Oh,
sure.
Okay. I think that is.
And there's also a mental, I think there's a mental aspect to this too. If you're married, I would imagine that you're more likely, if you're married, I think that you're more likely to stay with the person because you've made a very deep-seated commitment. It is something that's like mentally more committing. And it's something that we know is like tangible commitment too, because you start sharing assets and whatnot, and you get bound in that capacity. That being said, and we know this because we know that that's why people. What the fuck is happening here? That's why people will get cold feet. Because they know that they're making a really big commitment that's very meaningful. And I don't think that that's really necessarily a bad thing. I had a very good relationship with that concept when I got married to my wife. It's pretty poggers, some would say. But it is something to take account. And I think that there's something good about that. The problem is, I think with marriage, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I love being married. It's a lot of people get into them before they know if they actually, if they really know if they want to be with somebody. But I think the biggest problem with marriage is divorce in the way that we get divorces. It's very normal for people to stay in relationships for very long times, for a very long time. And I agree that people should work through their problems if they can, but sometimes you can't, and things get bad, and they bring out the worst in people. And when you're with somebody that you shouldn't be with, that's how things lead to both parties acting inappropriately in some capacity, and it builds up resentment and it builds up hate, and then you add a kid into that factor, and then all of a sudden when you get a divorce, you're using that kid as a bartering tool to attack each other, and you're trying to hurt each other in one final one last stand of pain. I think if we could figure out a way to normalize not that if we can normalize a better relationship with relationships, a better relationship with divorce, not to encourage people getting divorced, but to encourage people being more mature in their divorce, I think we could see a pretty positive outcome,
A worthy commitment that human beings should make. I would like you have a child, I believe.
Yes, indeed.
I would like your child to believe mommy and daddy are husband and wife, not just boyfriend and girlfriend. It's better for the kid, better for you, and better.
I think the kid doesn't understand what marriage is, and so you're going to teach them relationships. And if you teach your kid through your feelings and your actions that you love the other person, that kid's going to pick up on that, obviously. So you don't necessarily need to be married to communicate that mommy and daddy love each other a lot.
Better for the world.
But why do you think then that this marriage thing was the sort of more prevalent status for such a tiny blip in human history, and now it's already diminishing?
Well, I mean, the Bible was written 3,000 years ago and everybody got married. I don't know why you call it a blip in history. It's universal. People.
Well, I mean, 3,000 years ago is not that long ago compared to everything.
Got married in virtually every civilization.
Well, so if we consider modern humanity 250,000 years, for most of time, humans were not getting married.
All right. Look, if I can't talk about pre-Stone Age or pre-Bronze Age man.
Okay, fair.
Okay, since the Bronze Age, people have gotten married, and you know what? We've done better by every metric. Marriage makes a better person and a better world.
Yeah, what I see is commitment between two parents and probably a fair amount of economic stability are really the ideal circumstances. But I think I don't want to get away from your broader point, Dennis, which I think is you're recognizing the reality of the situation.
And I'm fighting it.
And you're fighting it.
And I'm fighting it because I believe that graduating high school, getting a job, and getting married, and getting married before you have a baby, that is almost the perfect recipe for a better life.
But going more broad on the other culture war issues I mentioned, you're 75, you've been at this for a while. Don't you think that maybe it's simply being lost? Or let me ask it in a different way. What catalyst do you think might happen that might turn this thing around so that the so-called kind of anti-woke side wins or resurges?
Well, it's a great question, and I don't have a perfect answer. I do think that the chaos of the trans movement, that people support the removal of girls' breasts when they're 18 or even sometimes younger, or boys getting castrated because they.
Right. So I just want to be very clear. Obviously, he's not trans affirming. You're not removing. You're providing gender affirming care to a person who has like gender dysphoria, and this is based on all the evidence, all the research, the best way to operate based on the information that we have, to the point where like the detransition rate is 1% or less, and that's not even necessarily because they were misdiagnosed. Some of that is lack of emotional or financial supports or community supports, and sometimes people detransition just to have babies. So I think that that's something to acknowledge, that this is like a diagnosed mental health thing. This is like very scientific in the way that it is expressed. So it's something to keep in mind, right? And once you're 18, do you. Surgery wise, I'm not a big fan of surgeries for anybody under 18, of course. But once you're 18, it's not like you're just making the decision on a whim. It's you, it's your doctor. If you are a younger person that may have to go on hormones to have the proper treatment, it would be between you, your parents, and your doctor, or multiple doctors. You should always get multiple choices, or second choices, or second, opinions, of course. Multiple opinions, some would say. But yeah, this is a decision that it's not as simple as like, oh, we're just doing a thing. No, there's a lot of mental health research behind this. There's a lot. And I know that there's probably conservatives that are listening and, to my audience, and they always get upset. No, it's a woman. It's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. I want to be very clear. We have a very normalized, in society, it is very normalized to believe in God. And I'm not disrespecting that, but there's no factual proof of that ever. It doesn't matter what cope that you're engaging in. There's no proof God exists. God is a shared internal experience that you and a lot of other people have to believe in something greater than yourself that gives you purpose. And I think that that's great. There's not a single indicator that it's a fact ever, anywhere. You saying so is wrong. There's nothing. There's no objective external proof that God exists. And I still think it's a beautiful thing that people believe in. But there's no difference between your religious identity and a trans person's identity. It's both an internal experience, something that you feel, something that a collective of people feel that makes them feel better, makes them feel euphoric to be able to identify with, and dysphoric to not identify with. And you can't prove it. And I think we should respect both. And right now we have tax exemptions for churches. I don't think it's so crazy to allow trans people to get surgeries and hormones based on mental health professionals, right? That have gone to school for like a decade. So
they say they're girls. This has alarmed a fair number of people, even on your side of the spectrum. They realize this is madness. We have gone out of our minds.
It's not madness.
And I know why we've gone out of our minds. I don't think you would agree with my analysis, but it is in. I can put it to you in one sentence. It is a quote attributed to G.K. Chesterton, but we can't verify he said it. I am only saying that because I didn't come up with this.
Okay.
When people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing. They believe in anything.
Okay.
And
listen, I this is the problem. Is this attribution to like society's downfall because of religion? Every war started with religion. Almost every war started with religion. The abuse of women starts with religion. It is every religion. It's very favorable to the man in the household. The abuse of children starts with religion. The age of consent, according to the Bible, is when a girl goes on her period. Slavery is justified in the Bible. I understand that there are some contradictions where in some newer versions of it, it's not good anymore. But just those contradictions in general are quite insane. Freedom of women, freedom of children, freedom of slaves was done in spite of religion, not because of religion. And so we need to understand that like religion is not the answer to anything. I think it could be a very beautiful thing, but your version of religion now, if you are a very accepting person, is because that is your religion being parsed with the reality of a modern day world, and you like, and that's it. You know, the very heavy focus on like, no, it's about loving thy neighbor. And that it's always been in the Bible. It's never been expressed until really now. And even now it's not, because people's rights are being denied. And this idea that like, oh, there's less religion, so there's more trans. You know, maybe there's a level of truth to that. Like I said before, very similar internal experience, I'd think. Like I said, both religion and gender dysphoria, we'll say, is an internal experience that can't be proven externally, that gives you a sense of euphoria identifying in a certain way. And so maybe there is something fundamental in people that they need to believe in something greater than them. And that might be religion, and that might be gender ideology. And maybe for some people it's science, and maybe for some people it's the concept of what it means to be a man or a woman. You know, maybe there is something fundamental, but there's nothing wrong. Trans and gay people have always existed. And we now have the medical access to be able to help trans people experience the world on the outside the way that they feel on the inside. The New Testament was meant to replace the Old Testament. Yeah, it just doesn't make sense to me. Why would there need to be a replacement? God's word shouldn't need to be updated unless somebody is manipulating God's word. I personally think that the Bible is a test from God. There's like 3,000 versions of the Bible. How many versions? There's 2,877 versions in 1,918 languages. I'm pretty sure somebody's fucking with it. It's like playing telephone tag. So yeah. Just something to be clear. Religion isn't really the answer to anything. Unfortunately, religion is the cause for a lot of problems in the world. And the more religious a society, the more oppressive it is. It's just kind of a fact. You look at like other like third world countries that are very religiously prevalent. It doesn't matter what religion it is. Those countries tend to be very oppressive to women and children in general. You know, age of consents tend to be lower. It tends to be more okay with the children getting married to adults. Well, we're doing a political conversation at Krello. Of course the Bible's going to get brought up. This is the political conversation. So
this trans movement is the proof. I said on Bill Maher's show 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Right before you saw that, it's gone viral.
I saw it.
I don't know what he's referring to.
He said, oh, Trump lies. I said, it doesn't compare to the lies of the left. America is systemically racist and men menstruate.
Yeah, well, America, it does have systemic racism in it. I mean, that's the whole different conversation, though.
And he cracked up. The whole audience cracked up, and the whole panel cracked up. They were all laughing at me. And Bill Maher said, this is why it's gone viral. There are like 10 million views of this particular scene, where he says, Dennis, where'd you come up with that one? And that was 2019, the fall of 2019. And people go, what, are you nuts? Who says men?
I thought I was yeah, I'm a Roman Catholic. I was raised religious. And, you know, listening to every day conservatives use religion to destroy gay and trans people. Like it's ruining my faith in God, right? So like that's the problem. There's the profound irony in the fact that it's religious people making me less religious, you know, because that's a big part of it. I think a lot of people are turning away from religion because it's not very accepting. That's what's happening to me. You know, it wears you down. I understand I engage in these topics more every single day, but this is what happens when you have gay or trans family, or, you know, it starts to kind of hit you it hits you a little bit. So.
Menstruate. Within 2 years, if you denied men menstruate, you were considered transphobic.
Well, listen, I mean, I'm glad to have, I'm going to be honest. I don't know that this is the most interesting thing for us to talk about, but that being said, I have said very clearly, there are some areas.
And it's really not like, yeah, trans men can menstruate, whatever. I don't really care. It's not an issue that really impacts people. Trans people are such like a small population of society. And that is front and center in the conservative conversation, though. Because like they said, there's not a lot of other meaningful anything going on. It's always trans people, because they can't be guns. It can't be a conversation about guns. It can't be a conversation about healthcare. It can't be a conversation about childcare. It can't be a conversation about anything, because there's nothing else to talk about for conservatives because they have no other platform.
As if we just say the world of trans issues, there are some areas where I feel quite confident. Like, for example, when it comes to bathrooms, I was just in Spain. Beautiful country, terrific seafood. I recommend it to you, Dennis. The bathrooms are just gender neutral. There's a sink there and a bunch of stalls, and people crossing the sink to wash their hands, and you use the stall you want. Everything's fine. The bathroom issue, I genuinely do not care about, even when they are organized the way they are in the United States. Another example that really just does not seem like an issue to me. People want to be addressed by a different pronoun. I'm going to guess based on...
Bro, do you want to talk about religion with me?
What I see, and if I get it wrong, I'm not insulting anyone. If someone tells me otherwise, I'll kind of just do my...
But yeah, I think that a movement to gender neutral bathrooms is probably just like the way of the future. It really doesn't matter. Locker rooms are different, because that's a little bit more intimate. Although I think locker rooms are already weird, especially in like high school. There's this conversation about like there shouldn't be boys or girls mixed. I agree. But my thing is, it's already uncomfortable enough as a man. I would have to get naked in front of other boys. Like, it was really uncomfortable for me. And like, I was always stupid. So there really should be locker rooms concept should be reworked to be, you know, less intimate in a weird way where like you see each other's boobs and shit. Yeah, after the segment, if you want to, let me know. You know, it was just awkward for me. I have weird nipples. And when I was a kid, I was in the locker room. I was just like, you know.
My best. You know, we can kind of negotiate these things. On some of this stuff, like a talking point I'm hearing a lot is so many trans people who go through gender affirming care regret it. And that's a sign that something is very wrong. When I research it, it seems it's under like 1% that express regret. And for some of that 1%, it's temporary. So I'm ambiguous about what is the right thing to do in some of these areas. I'm open to hearing from you to the extent that I judge you to be a good faith participant in the conversation. I don't know the answer. With some sports, you know, it seems pretty clear that there is an advantage to being biologically male at birth. It seems unfair in those cases to arrange it in a certain way. In others, it doesn't seem to make much of a difference. So I think that I'm very open-minded on this. You know,
I'm just curious. It's not even a challenge.
Yeah.
Name me a sport where there is women sports where it doesn't make a difference.
Chess.
Well, apparently it does. Interestingly. I was just reading that
Well, so to be clear, with chess, there is a difference between men and women. Men tend to be better at chess. That might be biological. It also might be social. You know, games and stuff like that, generally in more traditional areas, which is obviously changing, especially in America. In more traditional areas, you know, the young girls were the ones that were staying at home, and people were using chess, or young girls were the ones that were taking care of the house and whatnot. And being taught to do that, while like young men would have the ability to kind of be a little more free. Chess historically has been about, you know, strategy. Maybe men gravitate towards strategy, maybe they don't. Maybe it doesn't really matter. Maybe there's just not as many women playing. But there's a bunch of different things. Right now it does, but we don't really know for sure biologically. But I mean, maybe, I don't know.
International Chess Federation, whatever the name of the group is.
Yeah.
noted that men did play chess better, generally speaking.
Yeah.
By the way, if you're right, and I have no agenda here, then there should not be women's chess.
Right. So this chess is an interesting one because
it exists suggests that there is an advantage to separating the sexes.
My understanding is, and again, I think we're both trying to learn here. My understanding is the reason that the women's chess division was originally created was not enough young girls were participating.
Okay, fair enough, but it's not a physical sport anyway, so it's not a sport.
No, I mean, listen, I don't know.
So that you, all right, no, but you said where it doesn't matter, but if it doesn't matter, there would be no reason for women's whatever it is, track, field, weightlifting, tennis.
Sure.
But apparently there is a difference. A male who said he's a female won in Canada 2 weeks ago, and he not.
Well, it's not a male who said they're a female. It's a trans woman. And again, I don't think that they should be competing because it's unfair. But it's still a woman, you know.
Set records in the women's division, and I am saying he.
I don't know who he's referring to, though. Okay.
And a narcissist for hurting women like this.
That's what I'm talking about. It's this assignment of poor intentions. Like, oh, because they competed, they must be a bad person, etc. It's just somebody who wants to, be seen as a girl. I respect that. It's just that there's going to be areas where that might interfere with other things, like fairness. Right, so to assign this predatory intention, which is really what I think is going on, I think is just shitty.
Lifted 250 pounds more than the first place woman. Right. I know you don't think that's fair.
What are you even talking about?
On your side, the entire LGBTQ movement is unanimous in saying you're transphobic if you think that is wrong.
So, I mean, listen, a couple of examples. Equestrian, right? I mean, it's physical. You're riding a horse. A lot of it has to do with the horse. If biological men who tend to be heavier want to compete against women, it doesn't seem like a major problem. Sailing is physical. You have to dominate the sail as you are being pushed around by wind. Bowling, I believe, is gender segregated. I don't know that it needs to be. I mean, darts is.
Well, I mean, I imagine the heavier a ball you're able to move, the more effective you're going to be.
Another example. I mean, these are just some examples.
I don't know. Maybe.
Right. So wherever it made a difference, you'd be opposed to it. So you are transphobic according to your side. Okay. Please understand that.
Well, but I think the point that I'm trying to make to you is that there are many people on my side that are taking my view and sort of trying to figure out something that is admittedly not completely figured out yet. It seems incorrect.
I think all jockeys are like short men, right? They're like really short guys. Isn't that the ideal thing? I guess women could do it then. I don't know. I don't really care about horse riding, to be honest with you. Horse girls are weird.
It's figured out in most cases. I mean, it's figured out for racing, for track, for weightlifting, for tennis.
Yeah.
It's pretty universally. As I said, if there's no difference whatsoever, it is silly to have men's and women's sports to begin with.
And so you just listed a couple examples. I gave you 5. Fine. Sports is one aspect of this. Where are you on something like bathrooms, for example, and bathroom usage? Do you want like a genitalia check, or what are you looking for?
I think that.
I would love a genitalia check.
An elementary school, for example, where a boy says I'm a girl, and would be exposed in front of the girls as they are in the case now of college swim meets, where if a guy says he's a girl, Leah Thomas exposed his penis to the girls on.
So we went from topic to topic to topic. We started with like an elementary school, and now we've gone to Leah Thomas. There's a difference between locker rooms and bathrooms. That's number 1. Number 2, while I don't think Leah Thomas should have been competing with women, Leah Thomas didn't scar anybody in those bathrooms. When you say expose, there's a difference between somebody looking at her intentionally to see something or catching a glimpse of the corner of their eye versus her walking around and trying to show everybody what's going on. These are two very different things, right? I just want to be very clear. Because it's not, and again, it's this intentional language, expose, right? Like it's meant to be very hyperbolic and very dishonest. That's not what happened. Nobody's going around, or at least in this instance, they're not trying to expose themselves, right? It's a locker room. When I was in a locker room, especially those old dudes in the locker room, you might see their wiener sometimes. They walk around a little too freely. I understand that. That's traumatizing. Scary. Nobody wants to see that, but I'm going to be okay. It's a piece of the body. It's not that big of a deal. you know, and again, I understand when it comes to locker rooms. I just think that there should maybe be some kind of more individualized locker room experience, because I think that's uncomfortable in general. It's just weird that a bunch of people would get naked in the same room together. So.
But Dennis, I hate to interrupt. You first said kids. In college, they're adults, right? So which are you talking about?
Right, both.
Oh.
So I'll start. I'm just giving an example of where it does occur.
Okay. With adults.
I think that here, your anatomy should dictate in elementary school which bathroom you go to.
In elementary school, okay.
By the way, I have no problem if when there is a unisex bathroom with one stall, anybody goes in.
Yeah.
That's I have on occasion where there is one stall. I have gone into the women's bathroom if I really had to go to a restaurant.
Wow.
And it was a little nothing
Predator.
thing with just one toilet.
Sure.
So and I recommended to women to go into the men's because if my table was near the bathroom. So
very genteel of you.
I'm sorry?
No, I said that's very genteel of you. I'm sure the women appreciate it.
It's just common sense. I'm a big believer in common sense.
But so elementary school, it's a genitalia
yes, your anatomy should dictate which bathroom you go to in elementary school, yes.
Okay, and then...
Well, I mean, like, okay, in elementary, sure, whatever. I don't know that it necessarily matters. I think that we should normalize more like individual stall or bathrooms more than anything else.
Mario, should it also?
So if it involves exposure of your genitalia, it should be dictated by anatomy. If it does not involve exposure of your genitalia, look, as I say, I say this tongue in cheek, but it's true. If a man exposes himself to women or a woman, and she has not asked to see it, he's arrested.
Okay, but when you say you're using the word exposed and you know, I don't know about the specific. Well, the specific expose, you know. Make something visible by uncovering, reveal the true. You know, when I hear the word expose, I hear intention behind it. I'm not just hearing like, somebody had their penis out in the restroom because they were changing or whatever. I hear like somebody's trying to get people to look at it. That's not happening, right? Again, keep your eyes to yourself. You know what I mean? Don't be looking at my dingle while I'm taking a little wee-wee. Again, I understand though it's more of like the physical factor, you know, if for changing rooms, we'll say. But I think that we should just move to more individual changing rooms, more than anything else.
But where if he says I'm a woman, then she could be arrested if she complains. It's a little weird our situation. Why can't decent people just say, look, women are not aching to see...
Well, you can't just say I'm a woman and go wherever you want. Like, it's a lot more robust than that. And if you're somebody who's like not even trying to identify or appear or express yourself as a woman, like people are not going to take you seriously. You know, it's not, and this isn't something that's like super widespread, super happening everywhere. Again, I think that we just need to make a shift. Locker rooms are weird in general. It's time for us to shift away from locker rooms and shift more towards individual, like changing stalls, individual showers, curtains for everybody. You know, I think that's where we're at.
Men's penises. Therefore, if I say I'm a woman, I will not expose myself in front of women, even though I think I'm a woman. Why can't someone be that decent?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I don't ever see any genitalia in bathrooms in general. You know, like what is the exposition?
Right. Okay, that's fine. Well, yes, yeah. I understand that.
So that's not.
Dennis, what are you looking at? What are you looking at, bucko? You looking at my penis? That is a big thing, though. Like, whose dick are you really seeing in the bathroom?
No problem for you.
Theoretically, a man says he's a woman and he enters a stall and nobody sees anything. Then why would anybody complain?
Yeah, listen, that sounds reasonable to me. That sounds...
Yeah, and that's what... Didn't Dennis Prager just said that he would go into into the girls' room at restaurants? So, like, he agrees with this, no?
Eminently reasonable, what you're saying. We can talk about these other scenarios.
The battle is way, way higher.
Yeah.
The battle is what we call so-called gender care.
What?
We're
moving.
By the way, if the 2% or under 1%, whatever you said, of detransitioners.
Yeah.
I believe it's as close to a pure lie. You're not telling it. I know you read it. I read it too.
Yeah, it's not a lie. It's the truth. I don't know what you're talking about, but okay.
There's no doubt in my mind it's a lie.
Why? Based on what?
There's a lot of lying on a lot of these issues.
Based on what?
Because people feel if they have a humane agenda, they don't have to tell the truth.
Well,
right. So we've just entered conspiracy theory, right? His idea is because I think people are just trying to be nice, they're lying. You have to do more than promote a conspiracy idea. You need to give us more than I think it's a lie because there's a woke agenda, which is effectively what he's saying. I've seen plenty of people make this dumb argument. You need more. Everything that we're seeing shows us that this is the correct way to operate when it comes to people with gender dysphoria. That's it. Why? That's it. You need to do more than I think it's a lie. You have to show a lot more than just I think it's a lie. The burden of proof's on you at this point because they have all this information. If you're just going to say no, I don't agree, then like you can't even argue with that because it's not a logical argument.
Oh, listen, I mean,
I have proof for this.
All right, there we go.
Every European country has stopped this care for minors.
That's not proof of anything at all. I don't think that they've even stopped. I think that they have restricted it more, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but also these countries have its religious leaders who are the ones that are reducing that gender affirming care. And I think it's just surgeries. I don't even know what he's referring to. From what I understand, Norway did not ban gender affirming care for minors as health care headline falsely claims. Yeah, so we have like right here. This is what he's referring to. Norway, they're lying about it. The country has not changed the guidelines on gender affirming care for minors, which currently includes non-surgical treatments, but recommends against surgery for under 18 in most cases. I agree with that. An independent Norwegian healthcare board did not associate with the government recently proposed increased restrictions on such care, although not an outright ban, but has no authority to introduce changes. So basically, an independent Norwegian healthcare board that's not associated with the government recently proposed a change. So he's tacking on to misinformation. This isn't something that's happening. He's just being stupid. He criticized a headline of like, "Oh, I see that I see that your source says 1%." Well, guess what? My source says that it's not even that they're changed everything. It's like, well, that's not true. Right? That's not true at all. And religious individuals getting into government and imposing restrictions based on zero actual factual evidence, scientific evidence means nothing to me. It's not so far-fetched to see that there are people that are very religious centered generally that get into the government and go, I want to change this based on nothing, based on the way I feel rather than based on the evidence. So what you're saying is not true. He's just lying it. Or either he's lying or he's just decided to engage with the confirmation bias.
It has ended.
Because if there was information that said this is really dangerous, I would be like, oh, we shouldn't do this. I have no investment in this. I don't care. I hate trans people. No, just kidding. I don't. I don't care though. I care about what the truth is as well. And if we move forward and we see that some things are not so good, that's fine. That's science. Science is using all the information we have at hand to implement the best solution to a particular problem, and then as time goes, and those usually will lead to better solutions. Right? As of right now, very slowly, there are some studies that suggest that there's better outcomes or similar outcomes to not using chemotherapy for cancer. It's usually people who got caught very early. It's a very different thing. But the reality is we might see chemotherapy phase out. That doesn't mean that chemotherapy is bad. You could certainly look at the different negatives to chemotherapy. It's really stressful in the body. You lose hair, fucks you up, you puke. But right now, that's the best we have. And in the future, when we have better, I'm not going to look back and say, oh, we never should have done that. No, because that's what leads us to get here. That's how science works. So...
Finland has ended it. Sweden has ended it. Denmark has ended it. Norway has ended it.
None of them have. None of this is true. He's just saying words.
That's only the ones I know by heart.
So here's my concern about this.
We and Canada. I really apologize.
No, that's okay.
We and Canada are the worst countries on earth in terms of what we can do to minors if they say that they are the other sex.
I don't have that data in front of me, but let's just assume it's not even germane to the next part I want to go with this. Here's my thought on this. I also am not 100%.
Sweden didn't end it. They're starting to implement restrictions for some minors. That's not a big deal. There's nothing wrong with putting restrictions in as long as those are medical restrictions and not done by fucking religious idiots in government. Now, I don't know specifically, but we already found out that Norway, that wasn't true. I'm looking at Sweden now. I'm right now I'm looking at Sweden. It seems like they're adding some restrictions, which I don't think is necessarily bad as long as they're based off of evidence. So like again, they're not banning this. They're implementing restrictions. And again, either one, it's because the evidence is pointing to that's a good idea, or two, it's because like religious fucking morons that don't know what they're talking about are now deciding to get into government and legislate things away based on the way that they feel rather than actual facts. Right? There's one of those two things. If it's because of just like basically religious zealots in the government, I think that that's shitty, and I think that they should say out of something they don't know the fuck what they're talking about. But if it's because new information has come out that says like, hey, overall this is not the best idea, we should add some restrictions. There's nothing wrong with that.
And on some elements of,
but Norway, again, they're not doing that. So
this type of care for minors, I still am learning more and doing my research. One of the problems I'm having with some of the claims that are made by those who I would colloquially say are on your side, I know not everybody agrees on everything, is that when I research some of their claims, they are lies. Like, for example, this is super specific. This guy, Matt Walsh, went on Joe Rogan's podcast and said that prepubescent girls are getting their breasts chopped off. Now, let's put aside for a second that prepubescent girls essentially don't have breasts. Let's put that biological reality aside for a second. And when Joe said how many, he said, oh,
yeah, you usually don't. I mean, puberty starts growing your breasts, right? And you might go through puberty younger, but you can't actually get, I don't think you have, you don't have breasts until you go through your pubescence.
It's like millions or something. It was like 900 people over the last 6 years or something.
I think it was 3,000.
When I see such blatant distortions about,
I know what he's talking about. Like Matt Walsh claimed that there was like millions of children getting this surgery, and they're like, oh, it's like 3,000 over like 5 years or something. And he's like, oh, well, I think it's more. That's okay.
Happening. It's hard to believe that these folks are operating in good faith.
True.
I have no comment except to say your point strikes me as rather valid. How could a prepubescent girl have her breasts removed when so few of them have breasts?
It sounds weird, yeah.
That is what puberty brings with it, menstruation and breasts. But
yeah.
So I will actually ask Matt. I know everybody at Daily Wire, and I will ask him because it's hard to imagine that he would have said that. I'm not saying that you're acting in bad faith.
He said on Joe Rogan because he's a fucking idiot. That's what it is.
A lot of things are misheard, or maybe he misspoke. But
the problem is the idea that like, yeah, there's lying. Matt Walsh lied when it comes to this shit. Dennis just gave us misinformation when it came to Norway. He's being misrepresentative of these things. So
it shouldn't be happening. If a kid says to a parent, a 10-year-old, okay, let's take a 10, let's take a 12, it doesn't matter.
Whatever, go ahead.
Mom, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. Mom, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy.
Yep.
The reaction of a sane and decent society is, my darling, nature made you a boy.
That's not what happens, though, right? So if my kid at whatever age was like, let's say they were born a boy, and they're like, I'm a girl, I just would not acknowledge it. I'd be like, okay, I don't care, because kids say dumb shit all the time that they don't necessarily mean. What is not really happening, though, is it's not like, oh, my 10-year-old boy said that they're a girl. Oh, man, they're trans now. Oh, I guess we're starting. That's not how it happens. What happens is that like you'll have a kid and they'll start to say this from when they're really young. So maybe it's 4, 5, 6, and the right thing to do is be like, okay, whatever. It doesn't really matter. You don't over-affirm that. You don't under-affirm it. You just I don't. If my kid was like, I'm a girl, I say, okay, whatever. I don't care. It doesn't mean anything to me because you're a kid. You might say you're a fucking Pop-Tart tomorrow. As these individuals get older, as these kids get older, and if they continue to persist with this feeling, that's when we know it's something that's much more deep-seated, that they understand, than just saying, oh my God, I saw a trans person on TV. Now it's becoming part of their identity that they're expressing. And if that persists, from 4 to 10 years old, when you start to go through puberty, that's when you're really going to start noticing the difference. That's when you're going to want to take your kid to a therapist. And then your kid, you and your therapist will try to make an informed decision based on the topic. So the therapist is going to ask the kid a bunch of different questions to see how long this behavior is persisting. They're going to start with social transitioning to see if that's like the way to go. They might implement puberty blockers because they have better outcomes overall for people that actually have gender dysphoria. But it's not just, oh, you're saying you're a boy. Oh, we should have. It's not just, nobody's just saying that they're a boy or saying that they're a girl. This is much deeper than, oh, I'm just saying a thing. And so it's like, he's I don't know if it's intentional downplaying of the reality of it, or if it's just not understanding anything at all. And I think that it's possible that could be both. These are obviously not the types of people who look into actual objective data on these topics and make informed decisions. They just act purely, let's be honest, based on their emotions, how they feel. They feel that this is stupid, so they decide to legislate and make counter arguments to that. They have no interest in putting their feelings aside and trying to have like a conversation and look at the data. So they're not parsing through the data in any meaningful capacity, and they're coming to the conclusion that it's just somebody says a thing and that's it. No, it's a lot more than that.
Or if they believe in God, God made you a boy. Or
okay.
both.
Well, God made me trans, bro.
You are not a girl. You are a boy. And we're going to get you help. Obviously, there are other things going on in your life, which is almost always the case in these kids' lives. And look, how do you explain the
So that's like a really vague post. Hold on, is he going to say something?
1,000% increase?
Okay, that's a really vague thing to say. There's other things going on in someone's life. There might be. The assertion there, and it's a very subtle hint to it, is that those things are causing the core problem. Maybe, or maybe those things are causing you to be trans, or maybe you being trans is causing those things, right? People often say that there's an association with like being LGBTQ and having some kind of trauma associated with you, and the general assertion is that the trauma must cause that. It might. It's also possible that you being LGBTQ could cause the trauma in the case of you being identified as more vulnerable. When you have like a young gay or trans kid, they're generally going to identify in a way that's not super typical with every other kid. They're going to be ostracized. They're going to be more isolated. They're going to be more left to themselves. They're going to be more upset. They're going to have more issues with themselves, their body image. They're going to have a lot of different problems. And so they're now isolated and easier for predators to go after. Now, I'm not saying that either of those is the absolute truth. It might be a mixture between the two. But when you hear things like that come up, the instant assertion from conservatives is that it must be the trauma that causes you to be trans. When I think that like a lot of times it can be like identifying as LGBTQ or being LGBTQ can put you at risk. It shouldn't. You are LGBTQ at your core. Nobody chooses to be put themselves at risk. That's fucking ridiculous. But I think that that's what happens more than anything else. So that's that.
And look, how do you explain the 1,000% increase in trans kids in the last 5 years? It's a social phenomenon.
I mean, is there 1,000% increase? A 1,000% increase in trans kids. Putting numbers on the I'm wondering what the actual number is. I mean, we can put I don't know what specifically the number is, what percent increase it is, but let's be very clear. In 2016, I believe it is 2016, that's when gay marriage was legal. Okay, just be very clear. It is 2023, right? Gay marriage legalized. 2015. 2015. Okay. The point is it's 2023. 2015 in America was when we like legalized same-sex marriage in every state. Right? And the reason that it's relevant is because like these issues are tied together. The reality is that the more progress that the gay community makes, the more progress that the trans community makes, you know? And so my point is that we were so regressive that it wasn't even 10 years ago that gay people couldn't even get married. We weren't even accepting of gay people back then. We still aren't fully. And so like we're not accepting of gay people. We're not very accepting of trans people. Obviously, I think that goes without saying. We still said it. And so the idea of like, well, why are we seeing more people identify as LGBTQ or as trans now? Well, I think part of the factor is because we're starting to accept trans people more. And people feel comfortable coming out with the diagnosis. Do I think that there could be a social phenomenon aspect? I don't really know. In some cases, I do think that there's a lot of young people identifying as non-binary, and it's not because they necessarily are non-binary. They might just be experimenting with what gender and what that means from a philosophical perspective, or they might be annoying kids that are just fucking around. But when it comes to people that are diagnosed with gender dysphoria, while I always think we need to act responsibly to make sure that's the correct diagnosis. I think that most of that is going through parents, kids, and doctors, and the right decision is being made for that. So I would argue that the ones that are getting medical treatment, overwhelming, most of the time, are being properly diagnosed And it's not some kind of social phenomenon. The kids in school saying, I'm bisexual, that's probably partially a social phenomenon, right? Because when I was in school, some people were like, I'm bisexual, for attention. I'm not saying that all bisexual people do that in any capacity. Obviously, bisexual people exist. I know. Hot take. But yeah, I don't think you could chalk it all up to social phenomenon. I think it's a little more complicated than that. So
it's not a medical phenomenon.
Well, I think that's sort of I have an answer for that, and it relates to the same question of where did all these gay people come from 15 years ago?
But gay people have not increased.
My understanding is...
Well, they did. When it became more acceptable, gay people, they did increase.
That folks who say in surveys, I am gay, it has increased. I don't have the data in front of me. Okay.
Bisexuals have increased, and I have no doubt about that.
All gay people have increased. All of them. They used to not feel comfortable coming forward, and now they do, so it's increasing. And again, some of that is like bisexual. Like some of that bisexual increasing is because I think that there's less stigma on being gay. So some people who might be a little bit more heteroflexible feel more comfortable. Like for instance, bro, I jerk off to a femboy every now and again. I'm a straight guy. 10, 15 years ago, I would never admit that. Now I don't give a fuck. Right? So you can maybe you would consider me bisexual. I wouldn't identify as bisexual. I'm just your average femboy enjoyer. So yeah, but more people generally feel more comfortable coming out and saying that they're gay, and that's not even 100% now. Like I know people that are like, I know people that don't feel 100% comfortable coming out to their own family. Their family, it's not that their family necessarily would hate them, but they know that they would be looked down upon. It would be uncomfortable. So it's like a don't ask, don't tell. So,
but gay men have not increased. For gay men, it's fixed. There's a certain percentage of males who will never be attracted to a female.
Right. We're not saying we're not saying there are more gay men now than there ever were. Well, there are because the population is going up. What we're saying is that more people are feeling empowered or emboldened to be able to express that without fear of retaliation or harm.
Sort of fixed in any given generation.
Okay. On the first point, it's interesting to me to hear you say, if a 10-year-old said that, hey, we're going to get you some help, it sounds like you're talking about therapy. Every medical professional I've spoken to about this says the first line here in exploring this is therapy. So it does sound like you agree with the start of the path that has been established.
Yeah, but you can't even, I believe that there are therapists who could lose their license as a therapist if they say to a girl, I want to help you work out peace with the sex that you are.
Yeah, that makes sense that you would. Here's the thing. I talked to this is a while ago. I really wish I had the conversation. But I talked to somebody who deals with people with gender dysphoria. Okay. When somebody, the way that he phrases it, I just don't like the phrasing. When somebody comes in for gender affirming or gender treatment for gender dysphoria, for some people, very few, but for some people, the solution would be to help them identify or maintain their body. Like you might have a let's say you have a biological woman and they have gender dysphoria. Their gender dysphoria diagnosis, the treatment might not be to identify as a man. It really is so case by case on what's the best for that person. But there's a difference between having the option of being able to help that person be more comfortable in their body with minimal changes if possible. There's a difference between doing that and coming in with the intention of not trying to help them transition. You need to be open to whatever the correct treatment would be for that person. That's it. That's the extent of it, no matter what it is. And if you have, and the way that he expresses that, maybe I'm just misinterpreting it, sounds like it's almost like, no, we should do it this way. That's not what you should do. You should try to do the most logical, accurate thing, right?
That
I'm not aware of that. I have to plead ignorance because I just don't know that. I don't know that. I know lots of therapists.
And Dave and Dennis doesn't know that either because he says, I think. He doesn't. He's not really asserting a fact. He's just saying he thinks.
None of them have mentioned that that's a part of the protocol.
All right, ask all the therapists you know.
I will.
And not as a challenge.
I'm curious.
Can a therapist say to a 12-year-old, you, in fact, you're a girl, and I'm going to help you work through your acceptance of that?
Fair.
Can a therapist say that?
I'm going to find out.
Get in trouble.
I'm going to find out. My stepmom supervises 12 therapists, and I will find out what's going on, at least in one state. Dennis, I know you've got to run and that we're almost out of time. One just very last political thing. I'm curious. In 2016, you had said Trump was unfit to be a presidential candidate, let alone president. I've seen you endorse and defend many of his actions as president. What changed?
So I'm glad you mentioned that. So people should know he was my last choice among all the Republican candidates for the nomination.
Yeah.
But once he was nominated, I believe, and we can obviously do this in a part two if you'd like, I believe that it is very important for the left not to have power, because there's no example in history of the left, not liberals. I always make a distinction between left and liberal.
Well, people on the left, like, I mean, are you talking about like far leftists? Like, obviously, I agree that they shouldn't be silly gooses, but like people on the left having power is not a big deal.
Where they have not suppressed dissent. This is my greatest fear is the suppression of free speech, because that ends everything. So if a Republican is nominated, I will support him.
Guys, look, I'm playing WoW. You see here, this is body 1 and body 2. It's no longer male and female. These fucking pronouns have gotten crazy. It's crazy.
Turned out to be, in my opinion, a superb president. I'm not a fan of his.
Wow.
By the way, it's a big distinction. I wrote 25 years ago. It's in my book, printed in 1998. It's called Adultery and Politicians, an essay I wrote. I don't care if a politician committed adultery. I see no linkage between fidelity and being a good president or a good senator. I am quite consistent on dividing between the macro and the micro in a public figure. King David, not only
wouldn't this be like a contribution to the downfall of religious focus, though? Like, why would he say that you would be a good or a bad president? That would actually that just seems antithetical, because like your president is going to be your biggest example of how a person should act. So why this doesn't make any sense what you were saying. We need to have a more religious focus. We need to encourage people to get married more, blah 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 blah. But then you support a president who's an adulterer that's gotten divorced like 3 times. Like, your condoning of him and his behavior, which is what you're doing effectively here, wouldn't that be antithetical to what you actually want to do? Like, I don't understand. Vote on which race I should be, guys. Okay.
Committed adultery, and he's a hero of the Bible. He not only committed adultery, he had the guy killed so he could sleep with his wife.
Okay.
And that's pretty bad.
That may or may not resonate with some in the audience. But so, in other words, you're still...
no, it's not a matter of resonating. I only make this point. No, my fight on this issue is not with the left. It's actually with many on the right who think that adultery disqualifies you from being a good leader. So I don't believe most people on the left think if you committed adultery, you can't be a good president.
No, I mean, I certainly don't believe that.
Right.
Yeah.
So ironically, it should resonate with your audience.
Hey, if you had your choice of everybody running on the Republican side right now, if you knew whoever you picked would be president, who would you pick?
So I'm actually happy with a fair number of them, to be honest. I wish Larry Elder had been on the stage. I think the RNC cheated him, and that bothers me. I know Larry. If people heard him and saw him, they would be blown away at his erudition, knowledge, and brilliance. If Larry were president, I would retire from my work.
Wow. Okay. But of the ones that are running and made the debate stage.
Yeah, I don't have one single favorite. Okay. I really like virtually every one of them. I don't like Chris Christie.
Wow, that's the one guy I think is sane.
I'm sure you do, because he hates Trump.
Hey, look, Dennis, I'm going to let you go, but one last thing, just because of who you are, I have to have you weigh in on this. When it comes to corned beef, do you go lean, or do you tell them just give me the fat pieces as well?
Yes, actually, it's funny you should ask, because I'm on a pretty rigid diet now, which doesn't allow for carbs, and they want me to have the fat.
Oh, do they?
Yes, fat is. The government screwed up the Americans with their chart on having grains a lot and fat a little.
Well, you're on a low carb diet, so you would naturally replace that with higher fat. So, but it's not an ideal diet. It's probably because he's struggling with like diabetes and he's older, and so the idea is like, okay, you should have more fat and less carb intake, and then like your body will naturally use the fat as energy instead of the carbs.
Fat is not bad for people. It's actually in many ways good for people.
Well, so saturated fat, question.
All right. So you go lean, I take it.
I just don't like the texture.
All right. So I have one final word for you.
Please.
Okay. If you get married, I will attend your wedding.
Attend or officiate?
I even officiate.
Okay, fair enough. All right, very good. Even though she's only half Jewish, I have to admit.
I will officiate.
You would still do it. Very good. All right, Dennis.
Yeah, at least you're putting a little more Jew in her.
Prager, allowing us to bridge the gap between left and right, at least on some issues. I do really appreciate your time, Dennis. Thank you.